Hi, Callie. It'll be about 10 minutes before class starts. Um, and so hopefully the sound is working. If it doesn't, give me a quick text and we'll make sure that is. Hello, how are you, Keegan? Hi, Olivia.
Hi. Do you want me to scoop in front of the door a little bit?
Pardon?
Do you want me to scoop in front of the door a little bit?
If you want to, you certainly can.
Where do you want me to? Actually, I was gonna pick the pile of it.
Whatever you think is best. Let's see how this works. Huh. Okay. Let's try it again. There we go. Right back. Sweetheart?
I see about so there's a path on this one. There's still some snow on that one.
Oh, you did a wonderful job. Thank you. I thought I heard Katie rolling. I did. How are you doing, number 43?
Good.
So what do you gals know today? I'm going to give you a few minutes to take a look at your stuff. We're going to do a quiz, okay? Remember, memory work was second article of the Apostles' Creed, I believe in Jesus Christ. Okay? And Callie is not able to be with us tonight, but I think she may be watching with us right now on the live stream. So I don't know where that sounded. Did that sound come like it came back from there?
I sound like that.
Okay. Anyway, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to look at that, and then I'll hand out the quiz. And what I probably will do first is I want to have you fill out the memory work. It's fill in the blank, real easy. And then after you fill in the memory work, I'll let you use your book to help with the quiz. So I'll give you a couple minutes to look. Okay. Okay, let's do put your books away, do the fill in the blank, then you can go to your book. Okay, fill in the blank is at the bottom of your page. Put your name up on the top so I know who you are. But do the fill in the blank, that shouldn't take you too long. And then you may use your books. Come on, this should be easy since you get to use your books. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Kelly, thank you for sending me your memory work via video text. I appreciated that. You did a good job. So how's school going? Having fun? No? Out for any sports? So you got one of Casey's hats. What? She did? Where did she move it? If anybody needs to use the bathroom, please do so now. Okay, I'm going to have you turn, first of all, in your lesson books to page 50, lesson number 14. Then, in your Bible, let's go to page 90. It'll be Exodus chapter 14. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. I still think that this is one of the most exciting stories, historical accounts from the Bible. We've already learned about God's people, Jacob's family being in slavery for over 400 years. Jacob's family came to Egypt. Joseph took care of them. They numbered 70 in all. 400 years later, how many people do you remember I said Padre possibly could have been in Jacob's family? How big could Jacob's family have been 400 years later? About a million. Could have easily been about 1 million people. Either way, think about it. Even if you get into the hundreds of thousands, that's a lot of people. When we think about Cologne or Springview or Winter, small communities of a few thousand people. In Tripp County, South Dakota, we've got more cattle, more steers and cows in this county than there are people. So when you think of hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million people, that is a large group of people. And I don't think even 1 million would be overestimating it. So by this time, God has blessed Jacob's family. They're in slavery, and God even had blessed them while they were in slavery. And slavery's not fun. They were being beaten and abused and all of that. And they've been crying out to God for help for over 400 years. And then God, at the right time, comes to rescue them. And he sent those 10 plagues. It always just seems to hit right at the right time. Sometimes I think maybe the computers listen to us, but that's a whole other thing. So we had 9 plagues that God had sent disastrous events on the Egyptian people. And after every one of those, Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let you people go. When God would take that plague away, what would Pharaoh do? He'd change his mind. God would send another one. Then when we got to plague number 10, that was the nasty one, the first, unless the people had the blood of the lamb painted over the doorposts, the angel of death would kill what? The firstborn male of men and animals. And that happened. There was so much death in Egypt. So when that happened, did Jacob's family, did the Israelites, did they quickly run? No. What happened? What did the Egyptians do to the Israelites, Jacob's family? Okay, they gave them a whole bunch of gold, all that. You're very good, Olivia. You were listening. They gave them all of these precious gold and jewels, and then they chased them out. They couldn't get them out of Egypt fast enough. We're told that even Pharaoh, there was death in his house, his firstborn son. Pharaoh couldn't wait to get the Israelites out either. He didn't care anymore. And so Moses led the Egyptians out. You look at the map there, it's on your page, on page 50. And Callie, if you can see that, I've got it drawn here, but it's also in your book. Here is Egypt, where the children of Israel are. This is the promised land, the land of Canaan, where God is going to lead his people. If you were going to choose a path, what path would you choose to get from Egypt to here? This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is land. This is the Red Sea. You ever learn in school what's the quickest way between 2 points? A straight line. And so, now this would be me if I was going to decide this. We've got Jacob's family here. I'd take us right just like that. But that was not God's plan. God decided, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to take you here. Okay? Now, at first thought, that might not make any, or that doesn't make any sense. I'll tell you, why would he take them to water? You know, and actually, that's not really in the direction. It's not in the direction at all of getting to the land of Canaan. So when the people leave, God has Moses bring them here. And they're sitting right on the shoreline of the Red Sea. Let's think about a few things more that happen here now. In the meantime, think about this. You've got this large group of people. You think they can move very fast? No. Okay, they're walking. They have their animals with them, but they're not riding them. They didn't have cars back in these days. They had, like buggies and stuff, but, that wasn't this was very slow moving. It took them, a few days, maybe a week to get from here to there. And then they stopped. There's no place else to go. They're sitting on the shores of the Red Sea and they're camped out there. Now, some things change. By this time, once again, Pharaoh changes his mind again. Surprise, surprise, right? And Pharaoh now, he's angry and he's upset. He gets his army together and he decides he's going after Moses and the Israelites, and he's going to make them pay. He's going to wipe them out. He's going to kill them all. Now you have to think about this too at this time. Remember I told you that Pharaoh and the land of Egypt were the most powerful nation in the world at this time. And they had the largest and the most powerful army. Soldiers, spears, swords, bow and arrows. They had chariots and horses. And Pharaoh takes his entire army with him. And he chases them. He comes after them. Knows where they were going. Now, I want you to try to imagine this. You are an Israelite. You're one of Jacob's family. You're sitting there on the shore of the Red Sea. Okay? You're sitting on the shore of the Red Sea here. And there's no place to go. You see behind you, in the distance is coming Pharaoh and his entire army. How would you feel? Scared. What else would you maybe feel? Nervous? Would you start to have some questions about God maybe? God, why are we going to die? Are you going to let us die here? Okay? And the people came to Moses and they go, what's going on here? Did God bring us out? Did you bring us out here right here to the Red Sea, to the shores of the Red Sea, to die out here in the middle of nowhere? And Moses prays to God. He prays to God for help. And what God did to help was the Bible tells us it was like a big cloud, a pillar of cloud that God had come down between the Israelites and Pharaoh and his Egyptian army. And that cloud was so thick, they couldn't find their way through it. That was during the day. And then during the night, that cloud turned into a pillar of fire that would keep Pharaoh and his army from coming through. So God came to protect them. Now, another thing is, what was God's plan? You look at the map here, look again on your page. You got the Red Sea here. That there are some people who don't believe that what God tells us in the Bible, or don't like to believe in miracles. They say that, well, first of all, that you can understand in the Hebrew language the term Red Sea can be translated Sea of Reeds. And some people say that Moses probably had God's people up around here where the water was shallower and was swampier and had weeds in it. And so maybe there wasn't a lot of water there, but we're going to come back to that. God had a plan here to help his people in a very, very spectacular way. In a miraculous way. In fact, what I think is probably one of the coolest and probably one of the most spectacular miracles of nature that God ever performed. Let's go to page 90 in our Bible, Exodus chapter 14. We're going to read through this. I'm gonna read, and then I'm gonna ask, we'll start with, when I tell start in, we'll each take a verse, and I'll start with Olivia, but I'm gonna read through some of the hard names here so you don't have to do that. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to camp by the sea facing Baal-zephon. Then Pharaoh will say about the Israelites, they are wandering around in the land. The wilderness will shut them in. I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his entire army. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So that is what the Israelites did. Verse at a time, starting with Olivia.
The king of Egypt was told that the people had fled. Pharaoh and his officials had a change of heart concerning the people. They said, what have we done? We have let Israel go. They will not serve us anymore. So Pharaoh prepared his chariot and his troops with it. He also took 600 of the best chariots and all other chariots of Egypt with officers over all.
The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites. The Israelites were going out defiantly.
The Egyptians were stupid. All the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his
Charioteers,
and his army caught up with them where they were camping by the sea side.
Hahiroth.
The highway, which facing the front.
Yes.
As Pharaoh approached, Israel took up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. The Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you took us from to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us to our Egypt?
Wasn't this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness.
Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, stand firm, and seek the salvation from the Lord, which he will perform for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, you must win.
Go ahead, Keegan.
The Lord said to Moses.
Verse 15.
The Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to that.
As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide the sea so that the Israelites can go through the middle of the sea on dry ground.
I myself will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go into the sea. So they will go into the sea after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his entire army. Through his chariots and charioteers, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. When I have gained glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his charioteers. Then the angel of God who was going with clouds and his chariot horses moved in up behind. Then the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them.
I just want you to think about this, this verse that Keegan read here. Okay? And you did a good job of that, by the way, sweetheart. There are times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when we hear about the angel of the Lord and the angel of God. Okay? And many times when we hear about the angel of the Lord, that angel of the Lord comes to rescue God's people, to save them from disaster or death. And in many of those instances, the angel of the Lord speaks, and he speaks as God. Who does that sound like when it comes to God in the New Testament? The one who came to this earth to save us, to rescue us from the devil and from hell. Jesus. Many instances like these are Jesus before he came to this earth and was born and became a human being.
Could they see the angel of God around our phone? Yeah, the angel of God.
Yep. And here with the angel of God, while the angel of God doesn't speak, look what he's doing. He's coming and he's protecting God's people. That's what Jesus does. And in the New Testament, the New Testament part of the Bible talks about some of these things and reminds us, especially here, like at the Red Sea, that Jesus was here. And it's just something I wanted to point out to. It's also interesting to note that when the Bible talks about Jesus saving us from the devil and from hell and from sin, it talks about how that started all the way back here at the Red Sea with God rescuing his people. What was the verse that we left off at? Okay, I'm going to start at verse 20. I'm going to read for a while, okay? So you follow along, okay? The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them. It went between the Egyptian forces and the Israelite forces. The cloud was dark on one side, but it lit up the night on the other. Neither group approached the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all night long the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned the sea into dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites went into the middle of the sea on dry ground. The waters were like a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his charioteers went after them into the middle of the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud. Then he confused the Egyptian forces. He jammed their chariot wheels, and they had difficulty driving them. The Egyptians said, "We must flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the waters will come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their charioteers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal place. When the Egyptians were fleeing from it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the middle of the sea. The waters came back and covered the chariots and the charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh that went into the sea after the Israelites. Not even one of them survived. Even Pharaoh died in this. If you ever watch the movies like The Prince of Egypt or the Ten Commandments on TV, it shows Pharaoh standing on the shore. Pharaoh drowned in this too. But the Israelites went through the middle of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall for them on their right and on their left. On that day, the Lord saved Israel from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the mighty hand which the Lord put into action against the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in Moses his servant. Okay, now before I get to the questions here in the book, I'm going to give you a couple of situations here. You tell me what you think. Okay? Remember how I told you that there are some people that don't believe that miracles can happen. And so they tried to explain this and they say, well, God led the Israelites through a swampy part of the Red Sea where the water was really shallow. What do you see here that we read in the Bible that would speak against that? Can you find anything? What are some of the details that we read here that would speak against this being a shallow, swampy area? The walls of water on each side. Very good, Katie. Some other details. What kind of ground does it say that Israel walked across on? Dry ground. Think about this for a minute. Have you ever been to a lake or even like a river, like the Niobrara, or maybe like even a stock pond to go swimming? What's the ground like that you walk on when you're in the water? It's mushy, it's muddy, it's squishy. It's hard to walk in. Now think about this. This is a miracle again. The fact that Israel, God's people, walked across on dry ground, that's something that doesn't happen very quickly. This was a miracle. Also, when it talks about the walls of water, it also talks about, too, how Pharaoh and his army drowned. Those walls of water came in on them and destroyed them. Here's another point I want you gals to remember with this too. Did any of the people, any of the Israelites, did they have any weapons? No. Did any of the Israelites do anything to fight Pharaoh and the Egyptian army? No. God won the victory for his people. He wiped out the most powerful army of the most powerful nation on the planet in the snap of a finger. Okay? This shows the power of God. Yes, there were think about this too. Over a million people. And they did nothing to save themselves. But God did. Let's answer some questions here now. Let's answer some more. Why did Pharaoh and the people of Egypt want the Israelites to go? Why did they push them out? What's that, sweetheart? They were upset. They had lost their firstborn children. There was so much death. They finally had enough. They thought that if the Israelites stayed, everyone would die. They kicked them out. They paid them to leave. Think about that. For 400 years, these people, hey, they're our slaves. We don't want to let them go. And in an instant, they're paying them and to leave and pushing them out. They can't get them out fast enough. Yes, Keegan.
Okay, come on. Just right away.
They were, I mean, this was, and what, and see, the Israelites, they didn't escape. This was something that God said and promised them too when he sent Moses the first time. He said, when I do this, they're going to push you out. You're not going to have to run. They're going to push you out. They didn't have time to make bread dough with yeast. So the bread they baked was unleavened. What is unleavened bread like? Remember we talked about that last week. It's bread without yeast. It's kind of like a cracker. You know, like a saltine cracker. Actually, probably what they made was more. Have you ever seen like pita bread, pocket bread? That's more like, and that's bread without yeast, and you can make, and that's something that comes like from the Middle East. You're able to make it quickly, and remember, God wanted His people to be able to move quickly because when this happened, they have to be ready to leave fast. Okay, what is unleavened bread like? It's flat. It's without yeast. What did the Israelites receive from the Egyptians? All of their gold, silver, and clothing. I'm going to give you a little peek into the future with this. Slaves have nothing, right? And actually not even a whole lot of clothes on their back. I'm going to get back to that. Gold and silver. Now, were those people really going to need all of that? The gold and silver was something that God had these people use for when they built the place of worship, the tabernacle. And we're going to be talking about that coming up here pretty soon. And so there was stuff that was made out of gold and silver and other precious metals. That was that used for. But then they received clothes. This is something that's interesting to note. And we're going to be getting ahead of ourselves again. Because God's people were always grumbling and complaining. God made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years before He allowed them to before He allowed them to get to Canaan. These people had the same clothes for 40 years. This is another miracle. Their clothes didn't wear out. I just was thinking about that. Number 4. How long had it been since Jacob's family arrived in Egypt? Remember how when they first came to now, how many centuries? 4 centuries, 400 years. Actually, 430. It's a long time. Let's think about right here. We are in the year, and let's just say that we're in the year 2024. The year 1724 was 400 years ago. So a long time. That was even before the United States was a nation. So a long time in slavery. How did God make His presence known to the Israelites as they traveled when they escaped? Remember? Okay, yes. A pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And remember, actually, that's weird. This pillar of cloud, it's also called the angel of God. And very often, in more cases or not, where we see that angel of the Lord, the angel of God in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when it's rescuing and protecting God's people, that's very likely Jesus before he was born and became a human being for us. And that pillar of cloud and pillar of fire protected God's people from the Egyptians. What problem did the Israelites quickly run into after leaving Egypt? Well, where did Moses take them to?
The Red Sea.
The shores of the Red Sea, right here. When Pharaoh's army started chasing them, did they have any place to go? No. They were boxed in. They were pinned between the Red Sea and between Pharaoh's army. Pretty scary. Had to have been a lot of questions. What's going to happen? Are we going to live through this? Do you remember? Did you catch that when the people came to Moses? What they said to Moses, was that very nice? Did you catch that when they said, weren't there enough graves in Egypt for us to be in that you had to bring us out here to die in the desert? That's really kind of some really nasty sarcasm. And they said, I want you to think about this too. They said, we're saying all of this after watching what God did to the firstborn of Egypt. All of that death, and then the people giving them clothes and all of that gold and silver, and then chasing them out. They had seen God's power through all 10 plagues. And then here they go, really? You bring us out here to die? Moses, God, you're both letting us down. Now here's something. I don't want to pick and say that the Israelite people were better than them. Don't we do things like that too? Don't we forget what God does for us and all the promises he makes? And when things get tough, we forget about all of that and get just like these people too. What was God's solution for Moses to save his people from destruction by Pharaoh's army? Well, part of the Red Sea. God parted the water of the Red Sea when Moses raised his staff. We're told that the wind blew all night and they went through on dry ground. In a deep sea with it probably at least 100 feet of water there. That was a miracle, in fact, too, that God had, that they didn't have to walk through mud that was up to their hips. A miracle. Something to remember with miracles, too, when we hear people say, and you're going to hear people in your life tell you, you're really stupid if you believe in miracles or if you believe in God. God tells us that with him nothing is impossible. God can do anything. That's what makes him God. What is truly amazing is not only that the Red Sea parted, but how completely God worked this miracle. The ground was not even muddy, it was dry. What would have been the problem if they had crossed over on muddy, mucky ground? It would be slower, it would take forever. They'd get stuck. Maybe even some people would get hurt. Oh, it was probably about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. I was out with some friends and I was duck hunting in a swamp. Had my chest waders on. And as we were out walking, it didn't get above this high on me, above my chest. But that water was so mucky and then my feet got stuck in it and I couldn't get out and I was stuck out there in the middle. Couldn't get my feet up out of it, out of the mud and the muck. There was suction in there. And I had my gun and I was carrying a whole bunch of ducks that I had shot. And I actually had to, the only way I could get out was to crawl out of my waders. I had to leave them there, and I had to just to mess with my gun and everything, but I couldn't walk. I had to get out of there. And it was one thing that was scary. I didn't want to get my feet stuck in there, so I couldn't get out. This would have just been a mess for God's people, and it would have been slow to go through.
I remember one time we went fishing. We went fishing, and I don't remember where the place was, but it was really mucky, and the cows went through it all the time. And Shay, he had like a pair of sandals on, I think, he just put them on for it, and he lost it. And Bella was like, okay, I'll go find him. She lost one of her shoes too. So Bella was like digging in the mud trying to find her shoe, and then we finally had to leave. Bella was just covered in mud and shoe.
So we see a miracle there. How did God finally completely rescue his people from Pharaoh? He drowned them. Israel got out safe. You know what was another interesting thing before he drowned them? God let them come into the middle. And then as they were going through, he caused their wheels to get jammed up on their chariots and to fall off so that they would all get stuck in there. The Israelites would have time to get out, and then God collapsed the walls of water on Pharaoh and his army so that they drowned. All of them died. Not one of them were spared. I got to get something. I'll be right back. Just write that down.
I don't know if you saw me. Yeah, I
wanna read something for you. And I want you to listen very carefully to this. Okay? This is a prayer that we use sometimes in church, and I want you to tell me when you think it is that we use this prayer. Okay? It says, Holy God, mighty Lord, gracious Father, through your stern judgment, the unbelieving world was destroyed by the flood, but according to your great mercy, you spared Noah and his family. You engulfed stubborn Pharaoh and his army in the waters of the Red Sea, but led your people through those same waters to safety on dry land. In the waters of the Jordan, your own son was baptized and anointed with the Spirit. By these signs, you foreshadowed the washing that you give us in holy baptism. When do you think we use this prayer?
Baptism.
At a baptism, okay? You know, and in the Bible, when we have so many instances where God used water to save his people. One we heard about in the prayer was with Noah and his family. Remember we talked about that with Noah and the flood? In fact, the Bible tells us that God saves us with the water of baptism, just like he saved Noah and his family. How God saved his people from stubborn Pharaoh. God used that water to save the Israelites. So, if with water and God's powerful word, he saves us and forgives our sins in holy baptism. That's something that we got to get done with you and your other sister. And do that. That's something that's important because God, through that, God washes away our sins. Through baptism, God saves us. And so, in here at the Red Sea, we've got that instance where God saved his people from Pharaoh. That is something that points ahead to how God saves us with the waters of baptism. All right, let's go on. Let's go to page 93 in your Bible. And now we're gonna look at some stuff in there, but not everything. Now I want you to kind of look at where we're at on the map. God led them through on dry ground, and now here God's people are on the other side. This area of the world sometimes was called desert. It's not the type of desert that we think of, you know, like with sand and all sorts of like that. But this was a place where there wasn't a lot of water. It wasn't a place that was very easy to live. I want you to think about some things here. How many people, very possibly, do we have here again? 1 million people. It's not a lot of water. I mean, even just for a few animals that are out there. There's not a lot of food. How do they survive? This was something that the Israelites started to recognize right away. Here are all these people are out there. Now there's no water to drink and there's no food to eat. What's the first thing that you think that, what's the first thing do you think they did? And I'm going to tell you, it's a pattern that actually that goes with these people, and sad to say, it's a pattern that very often goes along with us too. What do? They complain. They grumble. They come to Moses and they say, what did you do? Did you bring us all the way out here so that we could die of thirst and die of starvation? As the Israelites journeyed far away from Egypt, what did they fear? Well, they feared they would all starve to death. And you know what? I'm not going to say that this wasn't that this was an unreasonable fear. There were not a lot of animals. Now, you guess what? They had sheep, because they were shepherds and so forth. But those sheep weren't going to last very long, those flocks that a few of the people had. They were not going to last very long out there to keep all of these people fed, millions of them. Why was the way they expressed their fear inappropriate? Well, they started to grumble and complain. They grumbled and complained. They did not trust that God would provide. They started grumbling and complaining instead of coming to God and asking for his help. Grumble and complain, grumble and complain, grumble and complain. Do your parents ever accuse you of that? Yep. And we as adults do that too. When things get tough, rather than go to God for help, we start grumbling and complaining. We don't trust that God will provide. Is there reason to trust that God will provide? Of course. God makes us this promise. He promises that we will always have everything we need. The Bible is full of promises like that. God says we will always have everything we need. He never promises we'll have everything we want, but he always promises we'll have what we need. When we grumble and complain, that means we're not trusting that promise. How did God promise to provide for their needs? Now here's something really cool. They're out in the middle of the wilderness. Rocky, dry. You can't grow plants out there. There's not a lot of water. First of all, God promised them that he would provide meat in the evening and bread in the morning. Now, what's interesting in what he did with this, the meat in the evening, God would, have you ever seen quail? It's maybe like a little bird, like a grouse or a pigeon. And there are some quail in South Dakota. You got to go a little bit out farther west to see them. They've got quail in Nebraska and Kansas, even in Arizona, in the western United States. They're good eating, kind of like eating a little chicken. God would cause flocks of these quail to come in to the Israelite camp at night, and these people could catch them with their hands. Didn't have to shoot them, didn't have to trap them, they could just catch them. They had meat to eat every night. What's interesting to note about the quail, To the best of my knowledge, quail were not native to this part of the world. Now think about this too. You needed quail to feed maybe 1 million people every day. This was a miracle from God. Dependent, I suppose. Then in the morning, God said they called it bread from heaven. People woke up, and in the morning, they saw like these little wafers on the ground. Looked like, and God told them to go pick them up. In fact, they called it manna, which means, and actually it's the Hebrew word for what the Israelites first saw when they saw it. It means, what is it? And what it was, again, the way it's described was it was like a little wafer like bread, and it tasted kind of sweet. And it covered the ground like dew. And God told the people every morning, go out and only pick as much as you need for the day. You'll get bread and it'll come every day, but don't take any more than what you need. If people took more than what they needed and there was stuff that was left over, it would go rotten. They couldn't keep it in pots and save it. But it came new every day. Was God faithful to his promise? Yes. He did exactly as he promised. This is also something interesting to note. God did this every day for his people for 40 years as they were in the wilderness.
They ate 2 things.
And you know what? And you know what? That is something that it doesn't surprise me that you brought that up. You sound just like my daughter, but yet you don't sound any different than me. That seems like a pretty small menu, doesn't it? Kind of boring. And the people got kind of tired of that after a while. But God was teaching them a lesson that everything that they needed came from him. It was also something and maybe you could say, he didn't want them to get too comfortable in the wilderness until he got them to where he said they were going, the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, and with all of this wonderful food in it and stuff. The Hebrew phrase that in English is translated, what is it, has been transliterated. It sounds like in the English, sounds like what it is in the Hebrew, manna. What does that tell you about the bread that God provided for his people? Well, they had never seen this type of bread before. No one made it. God just made it appear there for them. Sometimes they would call this bread from heaven.
So, did someone make the bread?
Yeah, and no one had to make it. Something interesting, remember I told you sometimes the people called it bread from heaven? Jesus himself, long after this, talked about it because God's people knew about this. In fact, when God had Moses save a pot of this and it was put into a big like cabinet that was called the Ark of the Covenant, which we'll learn about later. God had him save a pot full of this. It was in that case with the 10 Commandments. People called it bread from heaven. Jesus talked about this bread. He says, I am the bread that came down from heaven. And then Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Jesus says, whoever feeds on me will never die. So here's another thing. The pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud at the Red Sea, we see Jesus. In the manna, the bread from heaven, we see Jesus. And then there's another place, there's another place where we see, because the people get thirsty. And they're in a place where there isn't a lot of water. As the people continued to travel, now with bread and meat to eat, what was the next problem they faced? Well, you need water. They didn't have water to drink. You can go without food a whole lot longer than you can go without water. You can survive without food for at least a month and a half. You can't survive more than a few days without water. A place where there's not a lot, and there is a ton of people. Once again, what was their problem with their request? And maybe we just don't call it a request. What did they do again? They grumbled and complained. They grumbled against God and his leaders rather than simply asking God and trusting him to help. This is our sinful nature, Olivia and Keegan and Katie and me. This is my sinful nature too. We complain, we holler, we whine, we cry, rather than trusting God and going to him and asking him for his help. We see bad things happen and we get mad at people. And we even get mad at God going, why aren't you doing anything about this? Rather than going, God, help me. Help us. So what did God do? How did he provide water for them to drink? God had Moses hit a rock with his staff, and water came out of the rock. Here is another place where we see Jesus. In the New Testament, it's the Apostle Paul who talks about how God provided water for the children of Israel in the wilderness through the rock. And he calls Jesus their spiritual rock. He said Jesus was that spiritual rock. So we see Jesus again, not only in the pillar of cloud and fire, we see him in the manna, the bread of life from heaven, but we also see him in the water. Good, Jacob. We see God looking out for his people, protecting them, saving them. And that is what we see in the work of Jesus, our Savior. That second Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. When the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron about food and water, what did Moses say they were actually doing? They were complaining to Moses and Aaron. Who were they really complaining to? God. They were actually grumbling against God. And what's interesting to note is that God was patient with this, but then his patience came to a halt with this. Because they did it over and over and over again. They saw how God provided for them, and they moved to a spot. Oh, there's no water. Grumble, grumble, grumble. And then there were some times that came up where God punished them. God provides us with his representatives in our homes, our church, and our government. With what attitudes are we to listen to what they say? Well, let's look at what it says there in the fourth commandment. You see it in the little box down there at the bottom of page 52. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not dishonor or anger our parents and others in authority, but honor, serve, and obey them and give them love and respect. How are we, what attitudes are we to listen to what they say? We speak positively and respectfully, listening to and obeying them in love. This is where we all mess up. I'm not just going to pick on you as being kids for grumbling and complaining and disobeying mom and dad. We as adults do the same thing when it comes to those God puts in charge over us. Policemen, the president, our senators, and others. We complain, we show disrespect, rather than showing respect and honoring them by praying for them and asking God to help them. Which the Bible tells us that's one of the things that we're to do. We're to pray for our parents. We're to pray for our pastors and teachers. We're to pray for our people in government and our policemen, doctors and nurses and all that, because God has given to us to help take care of us. We're not perfect, neither are they. We all need God's help to do the things that he wants us to do. In the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer, we ask God for daily bread. What is that? Daily bread. Now, here you see the connection. Daily bread. Jesus taught us the Lord's Prayer. And he says, give us this day our daily bread. What did God do for his people here in the wilderness? He gave them daily bread, the manna from heaven. Notice that he gave them exactly what they needed every day. In the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer there it says, give us today our daily bread. What does this mean? God surely gives daily bread without our asking, even to all the wicked. But we pray in this petition that he would lead us to realize this and to receive our daily bread with thanksgiving. What then is meant by daily bread? Daily bread includes everything that we need for our bodily welfare, such as food and drink, clothing and shoes, house and home, land and cattle, money and goods, a godly spouse, godly children, godly workers, godly and faithful leaders, good government, good weather, peace and order, health, a good name, good friends and neighbors and the like. Daily bread is this, everything that we need to live.
You just said like a whole bunch of stuff and I'm trying to let down and you're like, and then I'm like, oh goodness.
There, you don't have to write it, because that's all written down there for you in your book already. Daily bread is everything that we need to live. God promised to provide for the Israelites, and he did with manna, quail, and water from the rock. God also has promised to provide for our physical needs. We can be absolutely sure he's going to do that because he has promised. What is the difference between providing for our needs and for our wants? We already kind of talked about this. God is going to provide for every need, but probably not every want. Tell me, is this a need or a want? And maybe the answers aren't as easy as you think that they are. A computer.
Depends on what you're doing with it.
It depends on what you're doing with it. A cell phone. Again, it depends upon what you're using it for, and it can depend upon your situation. Clothes.
You need those.
You need clothes, but do you need the most expensive ones? No. Okay. Jewelry. It could be a want. Snowmobile. Want. Tractor.
Need. It kind of depends.
If you're out on the rant, so you kind of get the idea here. God promises that we will always have what we need, not always everything we want. You didn't get that one? And if and if there's something that as I give you the assignment, you go home and you missed anything, you can go back onto YouTube and to check it out. I'm going to move on. Key questions. This is going to be on the quiz next week. Once they left Egypt, how did God rescue his people from Pharaoh's attempt to bring them back? Drowned him in the Red Sea. He parted the Red Sea and then drowned Pharaoh's army.
I was half right, and she's
Okay, letter B. How did God provide special food and water as his people were in the wilderness after leaving Egypt? What was the special food? Manna and quail, and then water from the rock. Bread in the morning, meat in the evening, water from the rock. Interesting to see how we see Jesus in the bread and in the rock.
I was just going back and I put that 8. I said he parted the room.
Well, sometimes it was called the Red Sea, not the Red Sea, but the Reed Sea, because the reeds in that C are red. C, how does God provide for our needs today? Well, He gives us what we need. Most often through our families. Mom and Dad have jobs. They earn money. Our needs are things like for health and medicine and food and education and all sorts of things. And God provides for those needs through our families. The day will come sometime where you will have your family and you will be providing for your children.
I'm gonna be single as pretty. Live in an apartment, buy chips on.
You never know. I used to talk big like that too. Okay, I'm going to give you your assignment for next week. We're going to have the 3 key questions are going to be on the quiz, and then go to page 52. I want you to memorize the 4th commandment. Honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you and you may enjoy a long life on the earth. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not dishonor or anger our parents and others in authority, but honor, serve, and obey them, and give them love and respect. That is your assignment for next week. We've got a couple. I'm trying to think here. It's not yet this month, but I think starting pretty soon in February, we're going to be having church on Wednesday nights and during Lent. During Lent, I want to talk to your parents about the possibility of having confirmation class on a different day of the week. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that, but at least we'll talk about it, at least for the 6 weeks of Lent. Okay? But anyway, you have a good evening. Be careful, it's going to be cold out there. Don't freeze.
And when you're walking outside, when I see the snow, there's a little bit of slush underneath, and that's froze.
Careful. Thank you, Kelly. You have a good evening. Call or text if you need anything.